Welcome back to the PIO Podcast, the show where we explore the craft, challenges, and evolving landscape of public sector communications. Today, we're joined by someone whose influence in the communication world spans literally decades. Shel Holtz, Director of Internal Communication for Webcor, is a leading voice in organizational communication, digital strategy, and employee engagement. He advised global brands. He's written extensively on the intersection of technology and communication, and help shape how organizations connect with both the employees and the public. We're going to dig into a lot during this conversation. Shel, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Shel, I truly appreciate that. Having somebody of your caliber on the show with your background in communication is just amazing. I would like to talk about your foundation and philosophy and what core principles have you guided your approach to organizational communication throughout your career?
Well, I think it starts with understanding the goals and objectives and the challenges that the organization is facing, especially from the leadership perspective, and focusing efforts around addressing those things. In order to accomplish that, I think storytelling, even today, continues to be the best approach to doing that. We're storytelling creatures, and telling stories that convey the information we're trying to get across is the best way to get people to pay attention. And telling those stories through the eyes of your employees for internal communications, even some external, telling those stories through the eyes of your customers is just an approach that I really believe in. I think authenticity is at the core of communications these days, making communication two-way. I hammer this all the time, that if all you're doing is creating content and publishing it, you're messaging, you're not communicating. Communicating requires there to be an exchange of knowledge and information. And if you're going to do that, listening has to be paramount. So I would say those are at the core of the approach I've taken to communication all these years.
Okay. And all great and valid points. I like the authenticity part of it. I think that has to be really true. I also truly believe, like you do, that it has to be two-way. If you're not interacting and taking messages off of your social media and replying to them publicly, all it does is say that you're tone deaf, and that's, especially in this day and age, we can't be that way.
Yeah, and I think it's not just an exchange on social media. I think it's also going to your audience and asking them questions rather than just distributing information to them, finding out what they think. I mean, even surveys can serve an important role in listening and two-way communication.
Absolutely.
Or focus groups.
Yes. So how do you define effective communication inside a large, complex organization? A lot of the public sector PIOs work in those big organizations. How do you define it?
Oh, that one's easy. You have to produce measurable outcomes. That means that you know what the outcome of the communication is before you distribute it, and you know what KPIs you have established. I mean, there should be measurable objectives associated with a communication. If you're communicating something that isn't designed to produce some sort of a result with your audience, if you want them to believe something or stop believing something or believe something more, do something differently, continue doing what you're already doing, do more of that. These are things that you should know when you're communicating. What is it you want from people as a result of this communication? And you have to have a means of measuring that. If you don't, you're just guessing. But getting those measurable outcomes so that you can go back and say, you wanted an increase in the number of people who understand this program our agency is responsible for. I don't know why they would want to spend money on communication.
It's interesting. I think that's communicators, they still struggle with, especially in the public sector, knowing what their KPI is, knowing what outcomes that they want to have, and being able to track those outcomes. I think that is a really big struggle in public sector communications.
It's a struggle in private sector communication too, to be honest with you. There is an association out there. That's all they do. It's the International Association for the Measurement of Communication and Public Relations, or Public Relations and Communications. I never remember, but it's at amec.org, and they have resources there. You don't have to be a member to tap into those, including some matrices that are really great for helping you figure out how to measure what you're communicating.
Good to know. I appreciate that. All right, so let's talk digital communication. What emerging technologies should public sector communicators be paying attention to right now?
I think that AI is certainly at the top of the list. You need to be paying attention to chatbots. This is what we've been seeing for the last several years out of OpenAI and Anthropic and Google and X. But agents are the emerging thing. This is why, according to the Boston Consulting Group, we've seen a massive shift in organizations of who's accountable and responsible for the implementation of AI in the organizations. In 2024, it was about 24% CEOs, and IT was at like 65%, because they were responsible for pilots and projects. But now with agents, it's getting much more strategic. It's much more structural. It's much more around governance. And now we're looking at somewhere in the 70% of organizations with CEOs now responsible for this. Those aren't the only things that we should be looking at with AI. Coding, I think, is also something to look at. I'm a communicator. I'm not a coder. I've never written a line of code. And yet I have now vibe coded 2 versions of an app that is designed for managers to take a top level change notice from the organization, enter information about their teams, right? Are we remote? Are we in the headquarters office? Are we field? Are we support staff? Are we hybrid or in the office or remote? At what level are these employees? Are they, mostly entry level? Are they mid level? This kind of information. Then you paste in the change message, and it gives you talking points, an email to send, FAQs to use to answer employee questions, a script for a morning huddle that's all tailored to that team, so that the manager is now an interpreter of the message rather than simply parroting what was sent from above, which is a model in communication we call a cascade that I've never liked. So if you've ever wanted to create a tool, but I'm not a coder and I don't have the resources, you can knock these things out in a few minutes these days. So I think that's important. Outside of AI, virtual reality hasn't gone anywhere. The metaverse, which was the big topic of conversation before AI emerged with the introduction of ChatGPT in November of 2022, VR seems to have, and the metaverse seem to have vanished from the conversation. But the development is still going on, and the use of these virtual worlds in the organization, not so much out there as a tool that you would use just for fun, but in the organization, businesses are finding a lot of use for this. We're also seeing advanced data visualization and mapping tools that are becoming more and more relevant to communicators. And another thing that I don't think communicators ever spent a lot of time thinking about, but blockchain is still out there. It's still important, even though Bitcoin's going through a period of time that I think that is distressing to people who invested in it. But a blockchain has a lot of other uses, especially around digital identity. And I think communicators need to be paying attention to that too.
Yeah, I think that the blockchain thing, that's an interesting thing. I started digging into that in particular in regards to individual identity. And that I think that's going to explode probably, I think, in the next 3 or 4 years, where that is going to become the norm for most people in order to verify who you are.
Oh, I agree. The idea, I mean, the example I use when people ask me about this is going into a bar where you have to prove you're 21. And to do that, you give them your driver's license, which not only proves you're 21, but gives them your home address, your height, your weight, your eye color, all kinds of information that maybe you don't want them to have. Wouldn't it be nice if there was a way to say, this proves I'm 21 and doesn't give you any other information? Blockchain with these tools gives you total control over what part of your identity you're going to share. And I agree with you. I think that's going to take off. I'm not sure it'll be in 2 or 3 years, but it's definitely coming.
Do you see AI reshaping the role of communicators, not just with the tools, but with the expectations that we place on them?
Well, first of all, you need to know how to use them and understand how they work. And I'm on LinkedIn a lot, as painful as that has gotten lately with so much of the content, obviously AI generated. But I have a great community on LinkedIn, so I see a lot of original stuff too. And the complaints seem to be around things like, oh, this was clearly written by AI because it has dashes in it, which it just drives me crazy. The other one that drives me nuts is seeing people say, this was obviously written by AI. My answer to that is, if it was clearly written by AI, there was a bad prompt involved. Because if you prompt a chatbot well, it's going to produce a very good document. And if you take the time to edit it and add your own personal flair to it, it won't sound like it was written by AI. No one will be able to detect it. And a lot of the work that we do in organizational communications doesn't need to. I mean, this is one of the things that I keep hearing is, well, AI doesn't have empathy and AI doesn't have lived human experience. And my answer is, I didn't know that an earnings release needed empathy and lived human experience. I didn't know that the announcement of the hiring of a new sales VP needed that stuff. I
Mhm.
have a gem on Gemini, Google's AI chatbot, called Write Like Shell. And I've trained it on 500 pages of my writing from blog posts and books and articles I've written and other stuff. And there's also a 20-page document that I've trained it on that just instructs it on turns of phrase I would never use and turns of phrase I regularly use, things that AI typically uses in writing that I never want to see it use. And now I'll throw a document that I've written in there or just, notes from an interview for a press release I need to get out. And I'll get a great first draft that is, 90% there. And no one's going to know that was written by AI. So, we really need to learn how to use these tools well and prompt them well. We also need to know how to integrate them into our workflows so that in the course of a process that you're using, when the AI is going to play a part and just becomes a natural part of that workflow. We also have to shift our thinking from just production to judgment and to some extent curation. There are
Mhm.
going to be expectations around speed and volume because of what AI can do. And I think we need to, at some level, meet those expectations. And at another level, we need to be able to temper them. Yeah, we can do this really quickly if what you're looking for is work slop. But if you're looking for something that's really going to move the needle on this thing that we want to move the needle on, we don't need 50 pieces of content cranked out in 10 minutes. We need something that's really thoughtful and strategic and will achieve that objective. And that comes back to that strategic planning. And right along that line, we need to know how to play the role of a counselor to the leadership of the organization, provide strategic counsel on these very issues. I think we need to be focused on ethics and trust as a core responsibility. And we need to put a premium on authenticity and the human connection. So those are all things that I think communicators are going to need to look at in order to shape their roles so they're relevant in this era.
All right, so that brings me right to my next question. What's your take on the balance between automation and authenticity in public communication?
It may be the wrong question. I mean, it's really not about balancing automation against authenticity. I think it's more understanding, what does authenticity actually mean in organizational communication, and where does automation undermine it versus, where is it not relevant? Yeah, authenticity in organizational communication has always been something that we construct. Even before AI, there was very little public facing communication that was purely authentic in the sense of being unmediated, spontaneous expression. We've been drafting, editing, getting approvals, wordsmithing for legal review. The CEO's personal message went through how many rounds of revisions? The
Mhm.
difference is we all pretended it was spontaneous and audiences mostly accepted that fiction. AI just makes the construction more obvious and efficient.
Gotcha. I like that. You know what? I like that, Shel. Thank you. What unique challenges do government communicators face compared to private sector communicators?
Yeah, government communicators operate under a fundamentally different set of constraints that shape everything they do. There's legal and regulatory requirements that we in the private sector don't have to deal with. You have an obligation to serve everyone, and that probably includes your harshest critics. There's political volatility that the private sector rarely experiences, the expectation of extreme transparency that has to be paired with extreme caution. I mean, I think we in the private sector deal with that to some extent, but back in the days when I was consulting independently, I had a number of federal, state, and local government clients, and I was always astounded at that balance that they had to achieve between that expectation of transparency and that need for caution and not saying the wrong thing. And then public information officers have resource constraints that I only have nightmares about. I complain about my resource constraints, but I think that's nothing compared to what you all have to cope with, given the fact that what you're spending is taxpayer dollars. And then we've already talked about measurement challenges. I think that's even tougher
Yeah.
under
Y- y-
the constraints that PIOs are dealing with.
So, like public information officers, you talk about the constraints, when it comes to budget and staffing. Most of them are one person operations in a medium sized agency, and at the most, even the big agencies, New York and in Las Vegas, they might be 10 or 15 people for the most part. But even then, you're talking about very limited resources, even when it comes to technology.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And restrictions on what technology people can use. It's a difficult situation to find oneself in as a communicator, especially when you're maybe a member of the Public Relations Society of America or the International Association of Business Communicators and hearing what your colleagues in the private sector have available to them. I admire PIOs who are able to achieve those measurable objectives with those kinds of limitations.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, Shell, if going in a different direction here, how could PIOs better prepare their organizations for crisis communications in a world where misinformation spreads so quickly?
Well, I think first it's getting the buy-in of the leaders of the organization that crisis communication is something that we have to take seriously. I think there are a lot of people out there in leadership positions who have an attitude about crisis that says we've got this. If something happens, we're ready, and they're absolutely not. But they think they are. It's part of that whole syndrome of saying, everybody communicates. I know how to communicate. I think some of the things that we can do specifically, first of all, one of the great things that AI can do is it can generate several hundred crisis scenarios for your agency or your department or your organization that you've never thought of. And I think that's a worthwhile exercise to go through so that you can look at that and say, ooh, that's one that we might really face. We need to prepare for that. Then you need to have holding statements ready to go, and they need to be approved so that when a crisis hits, you can pull out the right one, make whatever necessary revisions need to be made, and get it out there because speed really matters in a crisis these days. The first statement that gets out is the one that everybody's going to see. It's the one that's going to embed itself in their minds, and all subsequent statements are going to be trying to offset what that initial one. If that's not coming from you, then you're trying to counter what that first statement was that cemented itself in
Yeah.
people's minds. You need a clear chain of command for rapid decisions. You need pre-established channels that are populated by the audiences that already trust you because you can't build credibility from scratch in a crisis. You need the support of the people who are already on your side. You've built that bank of trust with them. I mentioned that speed matters more than perfection these days. So it's better to acknowledge what you know and don't know quickly than it is to wait for complete information while misinformation fills the vacuum from other directions. And finally, invest in relationships with the people in your community and the local media that you deal with before the crisis hits, because they'll be more effective at countering misinformation in their networks than any official statement that you issue.
Thank you. What's one thing agencies consistently overlook when they're planning for crisis messaging?
Well, they plan for the crisis event, but they don't plan for the communication about the communication. That can actually produce a meta crisis that happens when the response is perceived as too slow or tone deaf. We hear that one a lot these days. Oh, that was
Hmm.
just tone deaf, right? Didn't understand they didn't read the room. Or you get accused of lacking transparencies. We tend to obsess over what to say about an incident, but we don't prepare for people saying, why didn't you tell us sooner? Or, why are you hiding information? Or, whose decision was this? These are secondary questions about your communication choices, and they can do more reputational damage than the original crisis if you can't handle that well. And yet almost no one has prepared responses for these types of questions, or they've thought about their disclosure philosophy in advance.
That's one of the things that when we're doing training for Texas A&M and in the all hazards public information course that I teach, we always talk about in the absence of having clear facts, talk about the process of what you're doing, because that at least gives people an idea of what to expect as opposed to having nothing to give.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
So you've done some really extensive work with internal comms. What lessons from corporate world translate well to government agencies?
Yeah, and I have to say that internal comms is where my heart is. My job involves all corporate level communications, internal comms, public relations, media relations, even social media. But my heart is in internal comms and always has been. I think the biggest crossover lesson is that internal comms drives external reputation. Employees are your most credible messengers. We know this from a number of sources. The Edelman Trust Barometer couldn't be clearer about this. Employees are also your biggest vulnerability. Government agencies that treat internal comms as an afterthought are setting themselves up for all kinds of problems. I mean, it could be leaks, it could be stories in the media. I mean, I guarantee you there are subreddits out there from some government agencies where people are sharing stories about morale here,
Oh yeah.
staff who can't or won't defend the agency publicly. Second, I think segmentation matters just as much in government. A message to frontline service workers needs a different framing than one to policy analysts. Yet a lot of agencies still use a one size fits all memo approach that makes sure that everybody feels truly spoken to. But the corporate focus on measuring communication effectiveness rather than outputs is also important. Now, tracking whether messages actually changed understanding or behavior, not just that you sent them. Outputs rather than outcomes rather than outputs, something that government desperately needs, but really rarely does, from my experience.
Yeah, I know. That's always something I've seen so many organizations struggle with. Just letting their staff know something happened with a staff member internally before it gets to the media. I think that one alone, when they hear it from the media first, we've done such a disservice to ourselves because of that.
Yeah, you love the story of the employee who drives home and as he's getting out of his car, his neighbor's watering the lawn and says, "Hey, what's going on at your company with this thing?" And you say, "Wait, what?" Because you haven't
Yeah,
heard it from the organization, but he just heard it on the news.
yeah, not good, not good. What role should communicators play in shaping organizational culture?
A huge role. I saw a study that was just fascinating that asked three different cohorts in the organization who's responsible for building culture. And the three groups were leadership, HR, and frontline employees. And it may not surprise you to find out that all of them thought that they played the lead role in shaping the culture. First of all, I think we need to be translators of culture and early warning systems. We have to look at the gap between what leadership says the culture is and what the employees are actually experiencing, and then help bridge that gap. Part of it through messaging, but part of it is around this notion of integrity, one of the four enablers of employee engagement. We have to point out when the behaviors, the actions of leadership contradict the values that we say are important to us. Values are our beliefs. These dictate the way we do things around here. And when you see a leader do something or say something that contradicts that, that's going to have an impact on that culture. Communicators are
Yeah.
really positioned well to see patterns across the organization that people who are siloed, even leaders who operate in silo, don't see. So when you see a complaint surface in three different departments, or when a policy change is being interpreted completely differently across different departments, when informal culture is undermining initiatives. These are things that we can see because we see the big picture. We're one of the very few functions in an organization that has our fingers in every part of the organization. So we have that 40,000-foot view that can be invaluable to leaders who tend to be focused on the business unit or the group that they're responsible for. The mistake is thinking that our job is to sell the culture that leadership wants. The real value is being honest brokers who help leadership understand that the culture they have and shape, understand the one they have and shape the one that they need. My favorite definition of culture is the way things are done around here. And that may or may not be driven by the way leadership wants it to be. And we can play a huge role in understanding that, sharing that information, and driving the culture to where everybody thinks it ought to go.
Well, thank you for that, Shel. I appreciate that. Public trust in institutions has shifted dramatically in the last several years. What communication strategies actually move the needle on trust?
Well, I think it's a really interesting question because communication can't build trust, right? I always loved the old line that great marketing can't make a terrible product good. And I think it's the same situation here. Communication can't build trust. Trust is built through consistent organizational behavior that we as communicators can shine a light on. We can make it visible. And it's not just the good things. We build trust when we're transparent about mistakes. We're building trust when we're able to respond quickly, whether it's a crisis or something else. We can also build trust by demonstrating competence in the organization. There's research that finds that showing competence builds trumps being likable. And we can build community to amplify the institutional messages that once they get out there can help build trust. But we have to communicate the things that are happening in the organization that are building trust. We can't, the organization should not turn to communicators and say, build trust for us. That's not our job. Our
No,
job is, yeah.
yeah, they're just sharing the agency.
Right. And we can look for the right stories to tell, right? And we can ask for them. We say, yeah, we see in the survey of our customers that the trust is low in this particular dimension. Help us find stories that tell people why they should trust us about this. And if we can find those stories and share them, then we'll build trust in that. But those have to be authentic, real stories that are happening in the organization.
Absolutely. So, how can agencies communicate transparently without overwhelming the public or create unnecessary alarm?
Well, we need to have clarity of reasoning and process, not volume of information. Transparency doesn't have to be achieved and may not even be achieved through information dumping. So, one thing we can do is be proactive with explanations of uncertainty that could raise alarm. That could reduce alarm better than avoiding it. Saying we're still investigating can feel evasive. Saying here's what we know, here's what we don't know, here's what we're still figuring out, here's when we expect to know more, and here's what we're doing in the meantime is transparent and reassuring. So focusing transparency on decisions that affect people and processes can work real well, but I'm not going to argue for anybody to dump a bunch of information out there and say that makes us transparent. That just that just makes you
Well,
annoying.
that's what a lot of agencies think that they need to do is just send it out there and we're being transparent. We gave information, and the reality of it is what they may have given was not what they wanted to hear.
Yeah, and this gets to another issue that I spend a lot of time thinking about and some time writing about, and that's that anybody can hang out a shingle that says I'm a communicator without necessarily understanding the models and the research and the foundations. This is why I personally feel, and this is, by the way, a complete 180 for me. I used to argue the other side of this, but seeing some of the people who work in PR and marketing agencies and some of the work they do and some of the way they go about it leads me to think that a professional certification is a great way to be able to demonstrate to an agency or an organization that's hiring that I am qualified to do this at a high level, that I understand the models. I know that information dumping isn't going to produce a perception of transparency. There are other ways to do that that take harder work and more strategy and more thought. And for the institution to look at that certification and say, I trust this person is going to do that more than the other candidate we're considering would be something great to have as part of the ecosystem. I don't think we're there yet, but this is something I've come to really believe strongly.
I know that in the last several years, there's been a certification that the public information officers can get, and that is something that we've all talked about that we need to have that makes it more uniform across the board, so that agencies and they know that they're getting somebody that has that background to instead of somebody who just had a communications degree or was a journalist.
Yeah, exactly. I have the Strategic Communication Management Professional, SCMP, and I serve on the Global Communication Certification Council. So, yeah, that's exactly what we're trying to bring to the communication ecosystem here is that consistency that if you have a CMP or an SCMP, the employer can be certain that you know how to do this job at that strategic level that's going to produce those
Absolutely.
kind of results and not do things that may produce results but are unethical or do things that lead people to think that the results have been achieved when in fact they haven't.
Absolutely. Yep. What does humanizing the agency look like in practice?
I think it's showing actual people doing actual work the engineer who's been maintaining the water system, the health inspector who does a walkthrough, what he actually looks for in restaurants. Introduce them to the people. I saw a great video, and this goes way back. I don't know about how way back, but this was when people sharing stuff on YouTube and Facebook really mattered to agencies. And I think it was a municipal agency that did this video sort of like the Twilight Zone. It was in black and white. They had a guy who looked a little like Rod Serling doing the voiceover, and it went down into these big tanks that they have, these valves you can see above ground, and the tanks are underground. And the Rod Serling narrator is talking about this eerie place, and the guy in the hard hat's going, "No, it really isn't eerie," and he explains what it is. It was very entertaining. It was a great hook to bring people in, and yet you got to see what these things were underground, where you saw the valves and the parts all the time, and you got to meet two of the engineers who maintained them. I thought it was a terrific
That's a
approach to this.
Yeah, the public likes to see it, and they like to know what things are. They also like to see the people that are doing the work, and then it's a great storytelling tool to
Yeah.
do it with. So
So
yeah,
yeah, I mean, we can be creative with this stuff. We don't have to be boring, traditional. We can find clever and entertaining ways to do this, and funny ways to do this that draw people in and get them to share it and get them talking about it, and still achieve that goal of being human and introducing people to the employees who actually make this agency work.
yep, absolutely. How should I'm sorry, what's the biggest mistake organizations make on social media today?
They treat it as a broadcast channel. Clearly, it's a lot of agencies, a lot of companies think it's a one-way thing. And I understand that, as I think there was a lot of concern in the early days of social media. This is going to go south when marketing figures out that they should be using it. And to a great extent, I think that's been true. Organizations see it as a one-way channel for getting our stuff out there and not as a way to engage their audience. I remember in the early days of blogging, General Motors, when Christopher Barger was running social media at General Motors, he had a team, and he had a member of the team embed themselves in an automobile blog. There were a lot of them. Jalopnik is one that I remember. And all they did was read. And then when somebody posted something on the blog that they were able to answer, whether it had anything to do with General Motors or not, they did. So they became part of the community that was engaging in this blog. And then when General Motors came up, they were able to address whatever that post said without looking like they had just parachuted in, right? Hey, I'm here from General Motors
Mhm.
Public Affairs and I'm here to help. They were already part of the community. They had already built trust. These days, I think, a little less on blogs and a little more on Reddit subreddits, where there are subreddits that are talking about the whatever it is your agency or organization does. We should be
Mhm.
in there participating because it's a two-way channel. And then again, when our issue arises, we're a trusted voice in that community. So I really think it's not a broadcast channel. It's a two-way medium. It was created to be that way.
Agreed. How should PIOs think about content strategy when resources are limited?
Man, I'm not a PIO. I work in the corporate world, but I definitely have limited resources. I work in an industry that has a 1% profit margin in general across the industry. I've had to learn to say no. And I think that's probably my answer to your question is that you have to focus on what you can provide with the resources you have that makes a difference, that moves the needle in the organization, and stop doing everything else. Stop doing the nice to do stuff and just focus on where you can really make a difference based on what the expectations are of what kind of results you're going to produce. It's hard to say no. People love it when
Oh
you
yeah,
say yes and do this thing that they need. But increasingly, I've been saying no. I think that's the answer.
I like that. What skills will define the next generation of communication leaders?
Well, certainly critical thinking would be at the top of my list. I think we have seen a decline in critical thinking in recent years with stuff being generated by AI, in particular. The ability to look at something and give it that lens that says, do I trust this? Where did this information come from? What other agenda might they have? If you've not taken a course, I'm sure that Coursera or one of their competitors has one, but I think we really need to do critical thinking. Certainly AI and the ability to build AI agents and AI apps and to use AI effectively in communication is important. Soft skills, which is a term that I hate because I think soft skills are going to be what differentiates any employee these days, where the hard skills are ones that AI is taking up.
Right.
Data literacy, I mean, this has been important for a long time. I've taken a couple data courses so that I can look at data and tease the stories out of them and understand what it means. Sophistication around measurement and ethical judgment, I think, is something that should be focused on.
Yeah, I think ethics in communications is something that it needs work. We need work in the community, definitely. How could PIOs better demonstrate their strategic value to you, executive leadership?
Well, I think first, if you're measuring, then you can show how you're moving the needle. Executive leadership lives in a world of numbers. And if you can't present numbers, if your argument for your efficacy is based on a feeling or based on subjective measures like, oh, I heard from 3 people that this was a really good article, they're going to laugh you out of the room. I'll tell you something else that will get you laughed out of the room is that if you don't know the language that leadership speaks, I hear communicators almost daily talking about the ROI of communication. I would never go into an executive meeting and talk about the ROI of communication unless I was talking about money, because that's what ROI is, right? There is a formula that accountants use to determine ROI. It's not a broad, vague term. It is a division equation that is expressed as a percentage. And if you go in there and say the ROI of our communication is that morale is a little better, the leaders are going to look at you when you're not, look at each other when you're not in the room, and say this guy doesn't understand the business that we're in, or how we do things. You need to understand the language that your leaders speak and talk to them in that language.
Shel, what advice would you give to communicators who want to elevate their role from tactical to strategic?
Well, demonstrate strategic value on a regular basis. Focus on the problems that keep your leaders awake at night. And if you don't know what those are, ask. Go to the leadership of the organization and say, what keeps you awake at night? And again, speak their language, understand what they're talking about and how they're talking about it, so you can engage in those conversations at their level.
Absolutely. Is there a question I should have asked? And if so, how would you have answered it?
Yeah, I was thinking about this because that's the same question I always ask at the end of my podcast interviews. And I really couldn't think of anything. I thought this was pretty comprehensive.
Thank you. I appreciate that. All right, let's switch it up. Go to some rapid fire questions. You ready?
I'm ready.
All right, here we go. Phone call, voice memo, FaceTime. What's your go-to?
Oh, it would be, I would say FaceTime, but I'm not an Apple user. I do have an iPhone because it's my company's equipment, but video. The closer you can get to face, the better you're going to be.
Yep, I agree.
We are hardwired for face-to-face communication. I heard a speaker once at a conference say anything that isn't face-to-face is a corruption of face-to-face. So the closest you can get to that, the better.
Streaming binge or weekend read? What's your ideal escape?
Oh, weekend read. It's not that I don't like TV. A little binging is fine, but I'm a hardcore reader.
Morning ritual, sunrise workout, quiet coffee, or a news scroll?
A news scroll. I have a journalism degree. I was a newspaper reporter before I got into corporate communications. I'm a news junkie. As soon as I get up, my question is, what's going on?
Yeah. If you could adopt any animal, mythical or real, what would it be?
Another dog. I love dogs.
What's one song that always gets you moving no matter your mood?
Oh, I'm going to give something away about myself here. That would be Bertha by the Grateful Dead.
Good song. Temptation or teleportation or time travel? What power would you like to have?
This is a hard one, man, because I'd like to have them both for completely different reasons. But as a communicator, time travel would be extraordinary. Being able to go see how something worked out based on our communication and then go back and make adjustments. I was listening to a podcast once, I think it was on Freakonomics, and it was a consultant who had the team that was about to launch a major project with big money investments. He would have incense burning and the lights down, and he'd have people close their eyes and get into a Zen state. And then he would say, okay, the project has launched. It's 6 months later. What went wrong? And the things that surface that they hadn't thought of in developing this project can be remarkable. So just being able to go into the future and see for myself rather than have to go through an exercise like that would just be extraordinary.
Nice. Play it safe or roll the dice?
Man, is there something in between? I think playing it safe can be really dangerous, especially if something comes up that you hadn't planned for. Rolling the dice sounds like a real gamble. I think prudent risk is somewhere that should be in the middle of that spectrum.
I like that. All right. Which historical figure would you want to shadow for a day? Not just me.
I would love to shadow George Washington for a day. I've read several biographies. One of my passions outside of work is the American Revolution, actually American history from the Mayflower to about the War of 1812. But the Revolution is so prominent in the middle of that. And he was an extraordinary leader. And, there's reading about it and then there's watching it in action.
Yeah.
I would
yeah.
want to shadow him for a day, not when he was president, but when he was commanding the Continental Army. That's what I'd want to see.
Nice. Shel, final thoughts. What key points would you like the listeners to take from our interview today?
Well, first of all, that your communication needs to be two-way and focused on achieving objectives that matter to leadership, and that your audiences, well, first of all, I have an issue with calling them audiences anymore. Jay Rosen refers to them as the people formerly known as the audience, but these are cohorts who talk to each other. They talk back to you. They are not homogenous. There are different generations and different job roles and different levels of education and different ethnicities in any audience. Call them a cohort, call them stakeholder group, but understand that you're communicating to individuals and that you need to get more granular with your communication.
As we wrap this up, is there a piece of wisdom or a motto you live by?
I would think that the motto that, or the piece of wisdom that I live by is that communication really is at the heart of success in an organization. If an organization is not communicating, it will fail. And if I'm tasked with leading communication, my role goes way beyond creating content. I just wrote a piece on LinkedIn about the communicator's role in looking at process and systems and the messages that they send. And I think most communicators have never even thought about that. And yet those send messages. A process that rewards people for quality is going to dictate behavior no matter how much you talk to people about productivity and vice versa.
Right.
So systems audits and process audits are things that I don't think most communicators have even thought of. But if you recognize that communication drives business success, then you start looking at communication in a different way.
Nice. How can people best reach you if they want to connect or follow up?
LinkedIn is where I spend most of my time in social media, and I'm just Shel with one L, SHELHOLTZ on LinkedIn. If anybody wants to email me, shel.holtz@gmail.com.
Well, thank you very much for being on the show. This was really a pleasure.
My pleasure. I really am grateful for the invitation.
Thank you, sir. Have a great day.